A single candle quivered in the drafty corridor of Whitehall Palace, throwing restless shadows across the damp stone. The air smelled of wax and something older, fear, perhaps, or the heavy breath of secrets long denied. Beyond the wavering light, a woman's slipper brushed against the flagstones with a soft hiss, a sound meant to be lost in silence. London had fallen to darkness under the weight of plague, yet rumor carried faster than any sickness, and taverns across the city whispered of a queen who slipped through her own halls like a ghost. They said her name with awe and caution, as if even an echo might summon disaster. Outside, the city mourned. Bell towers tolled endlessly, a mournful iron heartbeat for the thousands who lay in shallow graves. Markets stood deserted, the air stank of lime and smoke from hastily burned refuse. The great Thames moved sluggishly under a moon sickly and pale, its banks crowded with pyres where bodies smoldered beneath wet cloth. Yet within the palace walls, velvet drapes and polished marble masked the same decay. Rats darted behind the embroidered hems of courtiers' gowns. Perfumed handkerchiefs, soaked in vinegar, pressed against nostrils could not banish the reek of death. Whitehall itself seemed a single great breath held tight, as though the palace feared to exhale. Queen Mariana walked this fragile world with a calm that unsettled even her own guards. Widowed before her 25th year, she bore no heir, and though the court whispered of barrenness, her presence commanded an unsettling power. Her black hair gleamed like wet ink beneath her veil, and her eyes carried a heat that left even seasoned ambassadors stammering. In the council chamber she spoke with a voice that slid like a blade through velvet, a sound at once low and inescapable. No petition left her untouched, no man, it was said, left her chambers unchanged. Lady Eleanor Vexford served at her side, a quiet figure whose grey eyes betrayed more than they revealed. Eleanor moved through the palace like a living diary, her every glance a careful line etched in memory. Beneath the folds of her skirts, hidden within a stitched pocket, she kept a small leather journal. Each night she returned to it with a trembling quill, recording whispers she dared not speak aloud, meetings behind shuttered doors, the faint perfume of strangers on the queen's skin, the flicker of crimson robes glimpsed in candlelight. She loved her sovereign with the devotion of a sister, yet dread grew with every inked word. The queen's confessor, Father Alaric, was a man of imposing silence. His eyes were dark wells from which no reflection returned. He had arrived at Whitehall from Rome with letters of introduction and a reputation for discretion that bordered on menace. When he passed through the palace gardens, even the birds seemed to quiet. He offered absolution to those who could pay in secrets, and secrets were a currency Mariana possessed in dangerous abundance. It was said the queen's footsteps vanished after midnight. Guards stationed at the West Wing learned not to question the clinking of a distant latch or the rustle of silks in forbidden corridors. Silver coins left on windowsills assured their blindness. Somewhere deep within the palace lay a chapel long abandoned, its altar draped in dust and forgotten relics. To this place, night after night, Mariana walked beneath the concealment of a plague mask, the long beak of leather giving her the semblance of a creature neither holy woman nor bird. There she met figures cloaked in scarlet, their faces hidden, their voices low and resonant like chants in a dream. Rumors fermented like spoiled wine. Some claimed the queen sought pagan blessings to restore her fertility, others spoke of rites older and darker than any church would name. A maid swore she saw candles arranged in a circle upon the chapel floor, symbols drawn in salt and ash. Another told of strange music, the sound of strings pulled too tight, echoing through stone. Each rumor reached Eleanor like a distant drumbeat. She tried to steady her heart with prayers, yet each night she found herself listening, waiting for the faint scrape of footsteps beyond her door. Then came the disappearances. 2 young maidservants, sisters from a fishing village along the Kent coast, vanished between one dusk and the next. Their empty cots bore only the lingering warmth of bodies recently risen. Search parties combed the gardens, the cellars, even the reeking riverbanks where plague barges moored. No trace surfaced. Whispers spread that they had succumbed to the sickness, their corpses carted away by mistake. But Eleanor knew the truth was not so simple. The queen's eyes that morning carried a glint both sorrowful and defiant, as though she held a secret that would never find light. Night thickened around the palace. A storm gathered over London, a low growl of thunder rolling across the Thames. Eleanor's candle guttered as she pressed her ear to the wooden panel of her chamber door. There it was, the soft cadence of footsteps, deliberate and slow. She lifted her skirts and followed, her heart beating with a terror that felt almost holy. Down the twisting stairs she crept, past portraits of kings whose painted eyes seemed to watch her trespass. The corridor at the base of the tower lay slick with moisture. The single torch at its end burned low, casting long shadows that reached like fingers across the stones. Eleanor flattened herself against the wall as a figure emerged from a side passage. The queen moved with the grace of a dark swan, her black veil whispering against the cold stone. At her side walked another, taller by a head and cloaked entirely in scarlet. The hood fell low, concealing the face in a darkness deeper than shadow. Eleanor's breath caught. No priest of the Anglican court wore such a color, no envoy of Rome would dare such defiance. The stranger's gloved hand brushed the queen's, a fleeting touch that held the intimacy of a vow. Mariana did not flinch. Together they passed through the iron door of the forgotten chapel, the hinges sighing like a soul at confession. The wind outside howled, carrying with it the distant cries of a city drowning in plague. Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp, every instinct screaming to flee, yet her feet rooted to the cold floor. Through the narrowing gap of the chapel door, she glimpsed a brief flare of crimson light, like blood igniting in air. The door shut with a finality that echoed through the stone like a bell for the dead. In that moment, Eleanor understood that the stories whispered in taverns were pale shadows of the truth. Whatever passed beyond that door was not mere scandal, nor simple sin. It was a covenant older than any church and deeper than any grave, a secret England itself might choose to bury. Her quill would tremble when next it met paper, but the words would come, as they always did. Yet even as she turned to climb back into the darkened palace, a thought chilled her more than the winter air. If the queen's secret belonged to something beyond the reach of king or pope, then no ink, however carefully hidden, could keep Eleanor safe when dawn returned. Somewhere in the depths of Whitehall, the candlelight died, and the palace exhaled at last, carrying its forbidden breath into the endless London night. London choked beneath a sky the color of wet ash. The bells of St. Paul's tolled without pause, a mournful rhythm for a city drowning in its own dead. Smoke from funeral pyres thickened the air until daylight seemed a rumor, and every breath carried the sour bite of plague and burning flesh. Rats scurried brazenly through deserted alleys, their slick bodies glistening in the faint torchlight. Fear ruled where law had faltered, reason lay buried beneath the heaps of lime-dusted corpses. Amid the terror, whispers of witchcraft hissed through taverns and markets, a venomous murmur searching for someone, anyone, to blame. The crown, desperate to shield itself from rumor, demanded a sacrifice to steady the crumbling faith of the people. Within the cold chambers of Whitehall, a single scrap of leather became the fulcrum of doom. Lady Eleanor's journal, hidden for months within the lining of her cloak, emerged like a viper from a priest's sleeve. Pages stained with ink and secrecy fluttered beneath candlelight, revealing midnight sacraments, coded names of noblemen, and the queen herself described in phrases that trembled between awe and fear. Servants swore they found it by chance, but Eleanor knew better. Someone had searched with intent, guided by hands far stronger than hers. The council gathered in a room where the windows were nailed shut against the stench of the city. Lords and bishops hunched over the journal, faces half obscured by perfumed kerchiefs. Father Alaric presided with an expression carved from stone. His voice, low and deliberate, cut through the hush like the draw of a blade. He spoke of temptation, of the devil walking in women's shadows, of a queen led astray by forces too vile to name. And when he revealed the disappearance of the two maidservants, his dark eyes glittered with manufactured sorrow. He claimed the sisters had lured the queen into unspeakable rites, their innocence a mask for diabolical cunning. Every nod around the table sealed the tale into something sharper than truth. Eleanor stood at the far wall, wrists bound in silk that bruised like iron. She tried to speak, to explain that her words were observation, not accusation, but her voice broke against their silence. Each line of her careful record, moments of candlelight, whispers in the chapel, a figure cloaked in scarlet, was twisted into proof of sorcery. A duke who once praised her keen mind now refused to meet her eyes. A bishop murmured scripture about Eve's betrayal. Fear was the only language left, and fear demanded theater. By dawn the city swarmed with soldiers. They dragged women from their homes, midwives who brewed herbal tonics, widows who prayed alone, healers whose only crime was to understand the properties of roots and leaves. The prisons, already swollen with plague victims, became cauldrons of despair. Iron masks clamped over the faces of the accused until breath came shallow and warm as rot. Outside, mobs jeered, shouting scripture and curses in the same breath. Children threw stones at women whose only sin was survival. Eleanor was thrust into a cell slick with damp, the straw beneath her feet soaked with the sweat of the dying. Through the bars she watched interrogations staged like cruel theater. Guards demanded confessions beneath the threat of flame. A healer was forced to walk barefoot across iron-heated red, her cries echoing like a psalm of agony. A widow was submerged in a barrel until her limbs thrashed like a caught fish. Each denial of witchcraft fed the frenzy, proof to the crowd that the devil shielded his own. Father Alaric moved among the prisoners like a shadow blessed by God. He whispered promises of mercy if they confessed, and when confessions came, born of terror rather than guilt, he smiled as if grace had triumphed. To Eleanor he offered nothing but a measured glance, a quiet recognition that her words had given him the weapon he needed. She understood then that the journal had not been found but delivered, and the Queen's silence was its own verdict. Night after night, Eleanor listened to the city's cough and rattle, to the scrape of rats in the rafters, to the prayers of women who no longer believed heaven would hear. She clutched the memory of the Queen's secret meetings, wondering if Mariana watched these events unfold with regret or cold calculation. Sometimes she thought she saw the Queen's pale face in the torchlight beyond the cell door, a vision both tender and cruel, but when she blinked it vanished into shadow. When the appointed day arrived, the square outside Whitehall swelled with a restless crowd. Smoke from plague fires mingled with the scent of pitch. A wooden pyre loomed high as a gallows, its branches soaked in resin. 3 women were bound to the stake, a midwife, a servant, a young girl barely 16. Their eyes searched the horizon for mercy that would not come. Drummers beat a slow cadence, a sound that vibrated through Eleanor's ribs as she was dragged forward to witness. She tasted iron in her mouth and knew it was fear. High above, a single shutter creaked open. Behind the narrow slit of wood, a silhouette appeared, slender, unmoving, unmistakable. Queen Mariana, veiled in shadow, stood watching. The crowd did not see her, but Eleanor felt the weight of that gaze like a hand upon her heart. Did the Queen stand there in grief or grim resolve? Northwest expression reached the street. A masked executioner stepped forward, face hidden behind black leather stitched like a crow's beak. He carried a torch whose flame hissed in the damp air. The women began to pray, their voices rising in a harmony of terror and faith. Sparks leapt as the torch touched the resin-soaked wood, and fire roared upward with a hunger that devoured sky and scream alike. The mob shouted approval, a chorus of relief and spectacle, but beneath their cheers Eleanor heard another sound, a low, almost inaudible sigh, as if the city itself mourned. Whispers threaded through the crowd even as the flames climbed higher. Some claimed the fire burned not witches but witnesses. Others swore they saw a figure in scarlet slip through a side door of the chapel as the first smoke curled toward heaven. By the time the embers cooled to gray, the tale had hardened into legend, the devil had been purged, the Queen was pure, and London could breathe again. But Eleanor, staring through the bars of the cart that would carry her back to the damp cell, knew the truth was only deeper buried. The pyre had consumed more than flesh, it had silenced a secret the crown could not bear to name. And behind a shuttered window, the Queen remained, her face unreadable, her silence an oath stronger than any confession.